By the summer of 1943, Los Alamos had become unlike any place on Earth. Hidden high in the mountains of New Mexico, behind barbed wire and military checkpoints, some of the world's greatest scientific minds were attempting to answer a question no human being had ever answered before. Could the energy locked inside an atom be transformed into the most powerful weapon in history? There were no instruction manuals, no previous experiments to copy, no certainty that any of it would work. Everything they were attempting existed at the very edge of human knowledge. Every equation, every calculation, and every experiment pushed into territory no one had ever explored. It was, quite literally, the greatest scientific gamble in history. The challenge facing the scientists wasn't simply building a bigger bomb. Explosives had existed for centuries. This was something entirely different. Conventional bombs released energy stored in chemical reactions. An atomic bomb would release energy from the nucleus of an atom itself, a force millions of times more powerful than any chemical explosive. The numbers were almost impossible to comprehend. If they succeeded, a weapon small enough to fit inside an aircraft could destroy an entire city in seconds. The theory suggested it was possible, but theory wasn't enough. Physics had to become reality, and reality had a habit of refusing to follow expectations. Inside the laboratories of Los Alamos, days blurred into nights. Scientists covered blackboards with equations that stretched from floor to ceiling. Engineers built devices no one had ever imagined before. Chemists worked to purify materials that existed only in microscopic quantities. Metallurgists searched for ways to shape metals that behaved in strange and unpredictable ways. Every department depended on every other. If one calculation proved incorrect, everything could fail. The project quickly divided into two separate paths. One focused on uranium, the other on plutonium. Both offered the possibility of creating an atomic bomb, but each presented entirely different scientific challenges. The uranium design appeared relatively straightforward in theory, though obtaining enough enriched uranium remained an enormous industrial obstacle. Plutonium, however, presented a far greater problem. At first, scientists believed it could be used in a similar design. Then the calculations changed. Unexpected properties in the newly produced plutonium meant the original approach was unlikely to work. Months of planning suddenly became useless. The realization sent shockwaves through Los Alamos. The team wasn't simply facing another technical problem. They were confronting the possibility that one of their two bomb designs might never function at all. Time was disappearing. Every delay mattered. The war continued to rage across Europe and the Pacific. American soldiers fought their way across islands. Cities burned, casualties mounted. No one knew how much longer the conflict would last, and hanging over everything was the same terrifying question that had launched the Manhattan Project in the first place. What if Germany solved the problem first? Although history would later reveal that Germany's nuclear program had fallen far behind, the scientists at Los Alamos didn't know that. As far as they were concerned, they were racing against an invisible opponent. An opponent who might already be closer to victory than anyone realized. The pressure became almost unbearable. Many scientists slept only a few hours each night. Some worked through weekends without returning home. Meetings stretched into the early morning hours. Arguments erupted over equations, calculations, and experimental results. Brilliant minds challenged one another relentlessly, not because they disliked each other, but because every assumption had to survive intense scrutiny. A single mistake could have unimaginable consequences. General Leslie Groves demanded results. Military leaders wanted certainty. But science offered no guarantees. Even Oppenheimer, whose confidence inspired those around him, privately understood how fragile the entire project remained. As far as they were concerned, they were racing against an invisible opponent. An opponent who might already be closer to victory than anyone realized. The pressure became almost unbearable. Many scientists slept only a few hours each night. Some worked through weekends without returning home. Meetings stretched into the early morning hours. Every breakthrough uncovered another mystery. Every solution created a new problem. Progress came not in giant leaps, but in painfully slow steps measured by endless calculations, failed experiments, and constant revisions. Yet despite the setbacks, something remarkable was happening. The impossible was slowly becoming possible. Theoretical ideas that had existed only on paper were beginning to take physical form. Precision-engineered components arrived from factories across the country. Experimental devices performed exactly as predicted. For the first time, the scientists could glimpse the finish line. But one enormous obstacle remained. No one had ever witnessed a nuclear explosion. No one knew whether the intricate calculations would survive contact with reality. Would the chain reaction unfold exactly as the equations predicted? Would the bomb produce the unimaginable force they expected? Or would years of work end in silence, a billion-dollar failure buried in the desert? The uncertainty haunted everyone. Some feared the explosion might be far weaker than expected. Others worried it might behave in ways no one had anticipated. The science suggested they understood the atom, but understanding something on paper was very different from unleashing it in the real world. There was only one way to find out. The bomb would have to be tested, not in a laboratory, not on a small scale, but in a full-scale detonation unlike anything humanity had ever attempted. A remote desert in New Mexico was chosen. A steel tower would be constructed. The device would be placed at its summit. And before dawn on a quiet morning in July 1945, a small group of soldiers, scientists, and military leaders would gather to witness the most important experiment in human history. Some believed they were about to end the war. Others feared they were opening a door that could never again be closed. Within hours, the world would enter an age no generation had ever imagined. And once that first atomic fire lit up the desert sky, there would be no turning back. After years of relentless work, the bomb is finally ready. Now there was only one question left. Would it actually work, or would the greatest scientific project in history end in failure, fade out before revealing the Trinity Test? After nearly 3 years of relentless effort, countless sleepless nights, and billions of dollars spent in absolute secrecy, the moment everyone had been working toward had finally arrived. Across America, the vast machine of the Manhattan Project had done what many believed was impossible. Oak Ridge had produced enriched uranium. Hanford had manufactured plutonium. Los Alamos had transformed years of calculations into a weapon unlike anything the world had ever seen. For the first time in history, humanity had built an atomic bomb. But building it was only half the battle. No one, not even the scientists who designed it, could say with complete certainty what would happen when it was finally activated. The equations predicted success. The physics made sense. The engineering had been checked, tested, and checked again. Yet there remained one terrifying truth. An atomic bomb had never been detonated before. Everything depended on theories that had never faced reality. If a single calculation was wrong, if one critical component failed, if the chain reaction didn't unfold exactly as expected, years of work could disappear in an instant. Some scientists feared the explosion might be disappointingly weak. Others wondered if the device would fail to detonate altogether. And despite their confidence, every person involved understood the same unsettling fact until the bomb exploded. No one truly knew if it would work. As the war continued overseas, the pressure grew even heavier. American troops were still fighting across the Pacific. Every week claimed thousands more lives. Military leaders believed that if the atomic bomb succeeded, it might bring the war to a swift end. But if it failed, there was no backup plan. The greatest scientific project ever undertaken would become one of history's greatest failures. General Leslie Groves ordered the final preparations. The weapon was carefully assembled. Every component was inspected one last time. Armed convoys transported the bomb's parts under extraordinary security. The destination was a remote stretch of desert in New Mexico, a place chosen because it was isolated, empty, and far from the eyes of the world. There, engineers erected a 100-foot steel tower. At its summit, they would place the most dangerous device ever created by human hands. Around it, scientists installed cameras, blast gauges, pressure sensors, and instruments designed to record an event that no one had ever witnessed before. For days, anticipation mixed with anxiety. Some scientists rehearsed every possible outcome. Others quietly questioned whether years of work had led them to the edge of triumph or disaster. No amount of preparation could answer the question that haunted every mind. What would happen when the countdown reached zero? Would the bomb unleash the unimaginable power hidden inside the atom? Or would the greatest scientific gamble in history end in silence? Before sunrise, on a July morning in 1945, a small group of soldiers, physicists, engineers, and military leaders would gather in the darkness of the New Mexico desert. Some stood behind thick concrete shelters. Others watched from miles away through protective goggles. No one spoke very much. There was little left to say. Years of sacrifice, years of secrecy, years of impossible calculations were about to be judged in a single instant. Now there was only one question left. Would it actually work? Or would the greatest scientific project in history end in failure? The answer would arrive with a flash brighter than the sun, and in that single moment, the world would cross a line from which there could be no return. The desert was silent. Long before the first rays of sunlight reached the horizon, a small group of men stood scattered across the barren landscape of southern New Mexico. Some watched from reinforced bunkers, others waited inside observation posts miles from the test site. A few sat in trucks, staring into the darkness, their eyes fixed on a single steel tower standing alone against the night sky. There were no reporters, no photographers from the world's newspapers, no cheering crowds. The most important scientific experiment in human history was about to take place.
Oak Ridge had produced
For nearly 3 years, more than 130,000 people had worked toward this moment. Entire cities had been built. Billions of dollars had been spent. Thousands of scientists, engineers, soldiers, and laborers had dedicated themselves to a single goal. Now, everything depended on what would happen in the next few minutes. Suspended atop a 100-foot steel tower was a device unlike anything the world had ever seen. It wasn't just another bomb. It was humanity's first attempt to unleash the power hidden inside the atom. The scientists had calculated every equation. The engineers had inspected every component. The military had prepared for every scenario they could imagine. But there was one thing no one could predict with complete certainty. Or had the greatest scientific project in history been built upon a fatal mistake? Some believed they were about to witness the weapon that would end World War II. Others feared they were about to cross a line from which humanity could never return. The countdown had already begun. In just a few moments, darkness would give way to a flash brighter than the rising sun, and the world would enter the atomic age.